Welcome to the Bible Made Clear in our next discipleship class. So we are at part 3, in point number 3 of our 12 points that show Christianity is true. And this is hopefully will be the last part in this third point, which is the theistic God is the true God. Now, we had left off at the end of the last video where Frank Turek was talking about the age of the earth. And, his points are correct in the fact that people really don't have the absolute data and all that. We all have our views. We are either going to have a young earth view or an old earth view. And for apologetics, in doing that, it is not the key issue. Now, as we move on through, old and young earth adherents differ in their views of the age of the earth. And so, we have the view, obviously, of the outer limits of the universe and how the age affects the relationship between the universe and the earth. But we need to be clear that the differences are related to the earth. So as we look at the two different views of the age of the earth, they're not necessarily the age of the universe differences. In other words, you can have young earth people that do not believe that. Now, there are some that believe the universe is 6,000 years old. That's fine. What I'm trying to get across here is that you will have people that have varying views of the age of the universe, but the point that's important is that it's really the age of the earth. Okay, and let me walk through this just for a minute. Okay, so we're talking about age relative to the furthest extent of the universe and how it relates to Earth and its age. So both views, whether you are an old earther or a young earther, make assumptions that cannot be scientifically proven. Now, we can go through scientific proofs on the Earth, right here where we live, that will lend itself to an older Earth or a younger Earth. Personally, I think that the preponderance of evidence demonstrates a younger Earth, but that's fine. That's not the issue. As far as dealing with apologetics, old Earth folks, the old Earth equates the Earth-time relationship to the edge of the universe. So they look out to the edge of the universe, they say the universe is 14 billion years old or whatever, and so that means the Earth is that old. I understand that. That's simple logic, and they connect that back and impose that on the planet itself. Young Earth, at least in the aspect that we are talking, they distinguish the time on Earth from the edge of the universe as being different. Okay, young Earth adherents, they also have the advantage of being more scripturally consistent. In other words, they don't need to change the days in Genesis. They don't need to make an aspect of Genesis a different genre. It can be basically what it is, how it's written. The normal language, equating what Moses wrote later in Exodus 20:11 about when he was listing out the Ten Commandments for the first time, relating it back to creation. As you as God created the world in 6 days and rested on the seventh, so you work 6 days and rest on the seventh. In other words, there's a normal correlation. There's no struggle with language. It's not getting into things that would be extremely difficult to understand. Grammatically, even Hebrew scholars that do not believe in a literal Genesis will tell you that that's actually how it's written, though they don't believe it themselves. So what does this all mean? Well, when we're dealing with the Earth time from an old Earth perspective, then the Big Bang cosmologists, and that's typically what we're dealing with for old Earth. And again, please, I understand it's not all people that, are either Christians or non-Christians that believe in a 14.5 billion year universe. And I understand that. We're just kind of isolating this down to two different groups, young and old Earth, just so that we can have this temporary kind of side conversation before we move on, because we're really dealing with apologetics and we're not dealing with creation cosmology. That's what we're not dealing with at this point, okay? But Big Bang cosmologists have a problem, which is called the horizon problem. In other words, in the first 400,000 years after the Big Bang, the initial flash, okay, the cosmic microwave radiation does not have enough time for it to equalize its heat distribution throughout the universe as it was discovered by, we'll see quotes from these guys, Wilson and Penzius. So the point in that is that 400,000 years, which is the estimated flash bang explosion from the Big Bang, does not allow enough time for the distribution of heat to be evenly distributed throughout the universe. Now, this is solved for them by adding an inflationary fudge factor. They say, well, it must have been inflation in the initial Big Bang event, which accelerates the particles to be distributed throughout the universe faster than the speed of light. It would have to be. Calculating this initial expansion into the theory allows for the equalization of temperature areas, throughout the universe. So basically, they're looking, when they see the CMR, or the CMB as it's called, the cosmic microwave, the background to the Big Bang, what they're actually looking at is they're seeing, in their view, back in time, and then as they look back in time, they're seeing this equal heat distribution, and it's like, well, there's not enough time for that to actually occur that early after the Big Bang, because that what they're looking at, in a sense, is the remnants, in a sense, right after the explosion. So they're seeing that. They're seeing that by the time that gets to us and we see it, and so they're estimating that time frame that it took to get here, and so they're saying, well, there's a problem. So they adjust the calculation and say, well, it must have expanded faster than anything that is currently understood as the laws of physics and all that, which is fine. That's their position. It's similar, to understand it, to how lighting a fire in a fireplace will eventually distribute heat to a large room. So after the initial lighting of the fire, the room requires time to evenly heat all the areas depending upon the size of the room. Now, there's a normal expansion of that heat throughout the room. Now, if you lit a fire and you're in an enormous room and the whole room is heated up in like 5 seconds, well, you have to assume something had to accelerate the movement of that heat. Now, whether you have a bunch of fans and, there would have to be something different other than the normal, okay? And so that's what inflation does for the Big Bang adherents, is that it allows them basically to kind of bypass all the known laws of physics and everything else to basically have what they see. Now, the problem with young Earth time, right? So biblical cosmologists see time measured differently depending upon the location you're in within the universe. Now, obviously, we have the speed of light, 186,000, miles a second, and we have, the ability to look out into the universe, what we can see, and all that. So there obviously is this aspect of time that seems to be much different than we are measuring it on the Earth as we look at time on Earth. So now, gravity and motion have a direct effect on time. This is connected to Einstein's relativity theory. Okay, it's relative to both gravity, motion, and your location. In other words, what on Earth may be a 6-day measurement may be a much longer time at the edges of the universe. They've done tests where they've measured time right at the ground, and then you go up 50 feet or higher, and they move, and then they have this time difference as they start to have motion in relation to gravity and location. So time is viewed in this way, can account for the apparent billions of years in the universe as measured by the speed of light, while at the same time only thousands of years on Earth. Now, this is not all biblical cosmologists. There are biblical cosmologists that are trying to harmonize the apparent difference because, there are these issues that both sides face. So, but the real problem is that you do not have on either side the availability and experience to actually go out into space and measure it and watch it and all that. You can't experiment. Now, the speed of light related to distant stars can be an apparent problem for young Earth cosmologists, but not more than the apparent problems that face older scientists when they have to face the added assumptions to make the Big Bang model and timescale fit the findings in the cosmic microwave background discovery. So there are issues on both sides, is my point. Now, here's the Big Bang model. You'll look at the beginning. There's the inflation. You can see it as, right after the quantum fluctuations and the explosion, and then you have this immediate expansion, this 400,000 years afterglow light. It's like the initial flash from an explosion, which Wilson and Penzius ended up discovering in 1965. So they end up seeing this, and then they realize, but again, if everything went at the normal rate, then you would not have this even heat distribution, which actually is shown in the picture, in between the white glow of the explosion and then the darker picture where it says Dark Ages, prior to the first stars being formed. You have that kind of aqua and yellow coloring there. That is the picture, in a sense, of the even heat distribution, which should not be there. But this is pretty much, what we see in the, the kind of drawn-out model of the Big Bang. Now, what's the bottom line to this? First of all, no human being was there when the universe was made. God asked Job, he said, "Where were you when I laid the foundations of the earth?" There was nobody there, right? So assumptions need to be made in reference to time and the earth's relationship to it in both views. So now, without using the Bible and just using general revelation, right, nature, you can still have variant views on time, old or young, and its relation to the earth are possible based on scientific discovery and certain assumptions. I mean, look, they measure electromagnetism. They measure, certain aspects of depositing of minerals in the ocean and, sediments and everything. And these create problems for old Earth, some of them, and some of them seem to challenge young Earth. I mean, all the dating methods are particularly unreliable, especially carbon-14. So there are issues, like I say, on both sides. Now, this is even without the Bible, just looking at things scientifically, and what we can do. So there are people that will look just from a science standpoint and say, well, the Earth cannot be that old. I mean, if you reverse the magnetism, I mean, you can't have life after like 10,000 years. That the Earth is just too hot. And they know that it changes every 2 years. It gets weaker at a consistent rate every 2 years. So if you just reverse it and go back and use the uniformitarian principle, that things just kind of stay the same, and there's nothing to interrupt it, then you have a globe that basically will not support any life. It's in a molten state, I think, 25,000 to 30,000 years. So these are problems. These are issues that everybody faces. Now, using the Bible, which is special revelation, we have more specific information to fill in areas left to assumption by scientists that use general revelation alone. So scientific discovery really confirms the Bible. I mean, every time we discover something scientifically, it doesn't disprove the Bible. It only continues to confirm it, whether historically or even scientifically. Now, I understand that, this is where the challenge comes in, how we view certain scientific discoveries, but we are not disproving any aspects of the Bible. And again, we're still on this kind of side tangent here. Haven't got back to apologetics yet. Now, having said all this, a young Earth view is more biblically consistent, at least in my opinion, and does not require any deconstruction of the Genesis account to accommodate it. In other words, you don't have to do grammatical gymnastics. You don't have to try to say that Moses was saying altogether different things than what he was actually saying, and changing genres and trying to accommodate certain aspects, or really it becomes very, very it becomes difficult to almost read the Bible at certain points in a normal fashion when some people get done with Genesis. Now, I realize that there's a number of Christians that have these different views, so they hold them for the reasons that they do, which we're not going to go into all those here. I'm just trying to give a high-level overview. So, dealing with apologetics, neither view is required for apologetics, okay? But we're going to accommodate one view to reach a secular audience. I mean, we're not talking to the church and trying to help them understand what view of creation is better, all right? We're not arguing the Bible at this point. We're not using the Bible at this point. Remember, we're not promoting biblical cosmology. We're arguing theism at this point. We're trying to get people that do not believe in God to have a reason why the only reasonable and logical position that a person can take is that the only God that can and must actually exist is a theistic God. Okay? So that's where we're at here. So what do we do with the Big Bang and the age and all that? Well, the goal of apologetics is not to push biblical cosmology, no matter what age you think the Earth is or the universe. The focus is on the fact of the beginning of the universe. That is the important thing. Now, allowing for the use of the Big Bang for an apologetic discussion, we can talk about a number of things. Number one, the fact that the universe had a beginning, because the Big Bang model tells us that the universe had a starting point. That's what we need, okay? And most people, for the most part, in society that are not Christians or not believers in God or whatever, look, there's a lot of stuff out there that, the universe is eternal and this and that, and it just, this oscillating universe. None of that stuff will stand up to any kind of true scientific rigor or challenge, because science doesn't reveal any of that. It's that is getting into that's like the multi-universe theory. It is entirely speculation. It's a conversation without any evidence. It's maybe what people want to have, but they have no reasonable scientific basis for holding it. Okay, this is like trying to go back and say the Earth is flat. No. We've already gone past that. We realize that the universe, that the Earth is not flat, and we also realize that the universe is not eternal. Okay, so we don't want to go back in time and become more ignorant of what we have already discovered. Okay, so the fact that astronomers who are not Christians interpret the evidence for a universe with a beginning, that is also something that we can talk about, and that is important. That helps us. The fact that there is a beginning, right, requires a beginner. This is where we want to go, right? So let's hear what some of the scientists that we're talking about, what they have to say. So Alexander Vellansky, he's a theoretical physicist. He says, "It is said that an argument is what convinces reasonable men, and a proof is what it takes to convince even an unreasonable man." Boy, isn't that the truth. With the proof now in place, cosmologists can no longer hide behind the possibility of a past eternal universe. There is no escape. They have to face the problem of a cosmic beginning. So this guy's not a Christian. I don't even know if he's even remotely close to a theist. I have no idea. The point is that this is what he does, and he realizes that the universe is not eternal. Okay, this is one of the guys, Arnold Penzius, that discovered the cosmic microwave background radiation. So Penzius' research into cosmology has caused him to see evidence. Here's the quote: "Evidence of a plan of divine creation." He says that the best data we have are exactly what I would have predicted had I had nothing to go on but the 5 books of Moses, the Psalms, and the Bible as a whole. Quite a statement from a guy. I don't know this man's religious background at all. So, I don't know, why he would make that statement, but I think what he's saying is that obviously the universe had a beginning, and that's what he's seeing in the CMB. The co-discoverer, Robert Wilson, he said certainly there was something that set it all off. In other words, the universe didn't make itself. Certainly, if you are religious, I can't think of a better theory of the origin of the universe to match with Genesis. So, again, saying pretty much the same thing. This guy, George Smoot, he is a astrophysicist, cosmologist, and actually a Nobel laureate. So he says the Big Bang, the most cataclysmic event we can imagine, on closer inspection appears finely orchestrated. The question of the beginning is as inescapable for cosmologists as it is for theologians. Again, quite a statement from a guy that I have no idea what his religious background is. My guess is that it's probably not much. And from Albert Einstein, he says the harmony of natural law reveals an intelligence of such superiority that compared with it, all the systematic thinking and acting of human beings is an utterly insignificant reflection. Now, the reason that that's an important statement is because the results of the start of the universe is revealing intelligence in what we can see. So that's a little bit more towards the design argument, but still, a very important statement nonetheless. Now, Dr. Robert Jastrow, he used to sit behind the Hubble telescope, and he said, now we see how the astronomical evidence leads to a biblical view of the origin of the world. The chain of events leading to man commence suddenly and sharply at a definite moment in time in a flash of light and energy. So that's from his book, God and the Astronomer. It's a quote from there. Again, a very powerful quote from a guy that understands all this stuff. He goes on to say, astronomers now find they have painted themselves into a corner because they have proven by their own methods that the world began abruptly in an act of creation to which you can trace the seeds of every star, every planet, every living thing in this cosmos and on Earth, that there are what I or anyone would call supernatural forces at work is now, I think, a scientifically proven fact. Now, again, he was an agnostic. I believe he became, a theist. I don't know if he, ever became a Christian, but the point is that, here's a guy that's being honest with the data. He goes on, he says, at this moment it seems as though science will never be able to raise the curtain on the mystery of creation. For the scientist who has lived by his faith in the power of reason, interesting statement, the story ends like a bad dream. He has scaled the mountains of ignorance. He is about to conquer the highest peak. As he pulls himself over the final rock, he is greeted by a band of theologians who have been sitting there for centuries because, again, the scientists, are just coming to the place where the theologians, because of their belief in the Bible, have been for years. Now, we need to understand that atheists are materialists, okay? Atheists are committed to the concept of materialism. In other words, God doesn't exist, and the material universe is all there is, and nothing is beyond it. Just physical matter. That's it. Now, the implication, the first one, is that the universe would have to be eternal because it's only a material universe, right? Time, space, and matter. Now, we know that it can't be, and there's all the evidence of that, but the implication is that if a person's going to be a materialist, they have to try to come to the place where they at least promote that the universe is an eternal universe, because otherwise they are dead-ending their own particular view, okay? Now, this is false, obviously, an eternal universe based on evidence, both physical and philosophical. We went through that. Philosophical evidence, we talked about time. Physical evidence, we talked about the second law of thermodynamics. We wouldn't even have comets if the universe was eternal. If the universe was as old as we think it is, we probably wouldn't have comets either, but that's a whole nother story. Now, the second implication is that the universe made itself. If there's only a material universe and it had a beginning, it had to have to make itself, right? Now, obviously, this is a logical absurdity, since the law of causality has to be completely ignored based on want and not evidence. So we don't want to entertain that. Now, nothing can't make itself, right? Like Judy Andrews sang in the old popular movie, The Sound of Music, nothing comes from nothing, nothing ever could. So nothing cannot make itself. If it did, no one would practice science because things would randomly pop into existence. You can't have nothing just make itself. Science is built on philosophy. In other words, you have to reason out what you're going to do and what you're going to do for experiment. For example, before you do the experiment, philosophy determines the rules of science. In other words, you have to establish, without science, just with your reasoning process, like what you're going to do and what rules you're going to follow. Then you do the experiment, and then afterwards, philosophy determines the interpretation of the data. you come to your conclusion, but then you have to reason through the data to come to some interpretation of it. It doesn't get there on its own. So science doesn't say anything, scientists do. And so we need to remember that as we're getting into a lot of the discussion on science. So look, creation is more than material. So science obviously is limited. There exists non-material aspects science cannot account for. Like we said, even philosophy, even the reasoning process. You can't scientifically validate a reasoning process. You can't experiment with it. You can't experiment with your conscience, your reasoning, and logic. I mean, where do you get logic? Where do you put it? It's a non-material aspect of our being. There exists non-material aspects like philosophy, like I said, science requires before science can be done properly. So we need to understand all that. Now, I got a couple of videos here, so I'm going to explain the two of them. The first one, William Lane Craig, who is a Christian, and Peter Atkins, who's an atheist, discuss whether there is something more than just the material universe, material existence, okay? So naturalism requires that there is nothing more than molecules that exist. That's the view of Atkins. Craig shows Atkins the logical absurdity and the self-contradictory position of the material-only position. So that's the first video. Then there'll be two by Frank Turek. So he's going to answer questions from students asking about the issues relating to the finite and the infinite, right? So there's two examples. The first video, the question about gravity in the beginning of the universe, he'll deal with that. And in the second video, he's going to talk about finites and infinites. So let's follow into the next one now.
To take about the world.
Sure, that's possible.
Okay. But do you deny that science cannot account for everything?
Yes, I do deny that science
So what can't it account for?
Well, had you brought that up in the debate, I had a number of examples that I was going to give. I think there are a good number of things that cannot be scientifically proven, but that we're all rational to accept. Let me list five. Logical and mathematical truths cannot be proven by science. Science presupposes logic and math, so that to try to prove them by science would be arguing in a circle. Metaphysical truths, like there are other minds other than my own, or that the external world is real, or that the past was not created 5 minutes ago with an appearance of age, are rational beliefs that cannot be scientifically proven. Ethical beliefs about statements of value are not accessible by the scientific method. You can't show by science whether the Nazi scientists in the camps did anything evil as opposed to the scientists in Western democracies. Aesthetic judgments, number 4, cannot be accessed by the scientific method because the beautiful, like the good, cannot be scientifically proven. And finally, most remarkably, would be science itself. Science cannot be justified by the scientific method. Science is permeated with unprovable assumptions. For example, in the special theory of relativity, the whole theory hinges on the assumption that the speed of light is constant in a one-way direction between any 2 points A and B. But that strictly cannot be proven. We simply have to assume that in order to hold to the theory.
But you're missing the whole...
So put that in your pipe and smoke it.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. So we are... None of these...
Yes, sir. What's your name?
Philip.
Hey, Philip.
You had previously stated that Stephen Hawking had his own belief about the creation of the universe, but you said that he failed.
Yes.
What exactly was it and why was it incorrect?
Stephen Hawking, on about page 180 of his book, The Grand Design, says this: because there's a law like gravity, the universe can and will create itself out of nothing. Now, I want you to think about that for a second. Because there's a law like gravity, first of all, where do laws come from? They come from lawgivers. And so gravity is not nothing, gravity is something. And gravity, it seems, only exists when there is a creation, when there is space, time, and matter. So Hawking wants to have gravity before the universe begins. But gravity would only seem to exist in the space-time continuum. So he's trying to have a creation before he has a creation. Secondly, gravity can't create anything. Gravity just does the same thing over and over again. It's not a personal force. Like, for example, if I keep dropping this remote, gravity isn't sitting there thinking, if Turek drops that remote one more time, I'm not going to pull it to the ground, right? Gravity just does the same thing over and over again. It can't choose to create. So even if gravity did exist, there's no way gravity could create a universe, because gravity is not a personal force that can make a choice. It just does the same thing over and over again. This is why John Lennox, who is an Oxford mathematician, wrote a book on Stephen Hawking, and in the book says, when brilliant scientists say nonsense, it's still nonsense. And what Hawking says is nonsense with regard to gravity creating anything. All right?
And then I wanted to go back to the infinite being thing, the concept that there can only be...
This one?
Yes.
Okay.
So it's great that it's up there. So number 3, a being that lacks something is not infinite.
Right.
I don't logically understand that, because we know that we have different sizes of infinity, and we have different versions of infinity. For example, odd numbers go on infinitely, just like even numbers do. And they're not lacking anything in being even or being odd. So how can there not be two gods that is a god of this and a god of that?
Well, because this is not theoretical mathematics here. What we're talking about here is a God who has attributes like justice and love and knowledge, and he's immaterial, he's spaceless. The attributes that he has aren't limited. If they were limited, then he wouldn't be the uncomposed, infinite, completely actualized being. There would have to be some other being that would have to have created him, because everything that's composed or has potential must be created by something else other than it. And you can't go on an infinite regress. Ultimately, you're going to get back to an uncomposed, completely actualized, infinite being that lacks nothing.
Okay.
I know this is difficult. It is. It's not easy to wrap your mind around. Half the time I don't get it, okay? But it's stuff that if you study long enough, you realize, yeah, this does make sense, even though I can't get my mind around. In fact, somebody put it this way. It would be strange if an infinite God wasn't strange to us. Think about that. I mean, if God is infinite, has no limits, it would be strange if that being wasn't strange to us. Why? Because everything that you and I understand in this world is finite. Everything physical is finite, right? It's put together. This is one reason why, by the way, in the Ten Commandments it says don't make any graven image. No, why? What's the big deal with graven images? Because any image you make of an infinite being necessarily limits his majesty. You can't draw a picture of infinity. You can draw a picture of Jesus. Why? Because Jesus had two natures. He had a divine nature and a human nature. You can draw the human nature. You can't draw the divine nature. It's infinite. Has no limits. That's why the closest thing in our experience to an infinite being are the heavens. Stars equivalent to grains of sand on all the beaches on all the earth over 200,000 years at 5 miles a second between those stars. That gives us some kind of comprehension of what infinity means.
So I think that those were instructive. We'll move on. I would recommend this book. This is from Turek, Stealing from God. Why Atheists Need God to Make Their Case. So it's an excellent book for understanding how atheists basically take the theistic worldview and then argue back against God. So this is a good book, and I would recommend it. Now, from the book, Turek makes the point that atheism has too many hypocrites. He says what we learn through observation and reflection is that the most precious things in life are spiritual, not material. Spiritual realities make life worth living. Love, relationships, acceptance, hope, compassion, justice, meaning, joy, and fleeting moments of transcendence reminds us that we were made to experience something and someone greater. Atheists deny these obvious aspects of human experience. They cling to A materialistic worldview that is not only self-defeating intellectually, it's far too restrictive to explain ultimate reality. It lacks the power and scope to explain what we know is true. And isn't that true? So, again, from his book, what we understand from the initial first cause, the uncaused cause, God, would have to be spaceless, timeless, immaterial, right? Because space, time, and matter were created, therefore the cause must transcend space, time, and matter, right? Can't be part of it. Would have to be a self-existent being and fully actualized, infinite, because a timeless being has no beginning and was not caused by another. Simple in essence, right? Essence meaning what, his nature, who he is, what he is. Because an infinite being can't have parts. A being with parts would be limited and required assembly by another. He's not composed, in other words. Personal, in order to choose to create, since an impersonal force has no capacity to choose to create anything. He made the point about gravity not being able to create. Powerful, in order to create the universe out of nothing. Intelligent, in order to design and sustain the universe and its processes with such extreme goal-directed precision, to author highly complex information, to provide his creatures with the ability to reason, and morally perfect as the ground of objective moral values. So, this will be Turek's next video.
Okay, I feel like this talk's kind of gonna have engendered a lot of confusion because there's a lot of things I noticed, and forgive me, I spoke out earlier.
That's all right.
There's a lot of things that you did in this talk, in this presentation. You kind of gish-galloped over a bunch of things, and there's a lot of logical fallacies. I don't want to address all of them. I can't. I know you've got a limited amount of time. The biggest problem I noticed is you mentioned a few times, and kind of disparagingly, this idea of an atheistic worldview, and then you attack that. That's a great straw man because atheism is not a worldview. And I know that you've been made aware of this because you've had debates with other people to this effect. So I would...
Okay, what do you mean by worldview?
Well, that's what I would like to ask you. Atheism is just the rejection of the claim of theism, which tells you nothing about how that person thinks about social rules, who they want to vote for, whether they like cake more than they like pie. It's not a worldview. Atheism is simply saying God is not guilty of existing. It's not the same thing as saying God does not exist. Now, there are atheists who do that. They'd be called strong atheists, or what we call Gnostic atheists. But atheism is just a rejection of the claim of God existing.
Okay, let me ask you a question about this, Scott. Here's the proposition. God exists. Do you agree with that proposition? Do you disagree with that proposition? Or you don't know?
I don't know.
Okay, so you're an agnostic then.
Well, agnosticism addresses knowledge, right?
So you don't know.
Theism addresses a belief claim. So I would be agnostic atheist. I do not know that God does or does not exist, but I do not believe that he does.
Okay, well, you still believe that you don't know whether God exists, so it's still a belief.
It's a lack of belief.
No, you believe that it's true that you don't know that God exists.
And your point is?
Okay, well, my point is that atheists today are trying to say, I have a lack of belief in God. For me, that's just saying something about your psychological state. It doesn't say anything about the real world out there. It doesn't say whether or not God exists. You're simply saying, I lack a belief in God.
Sure.
Well, this water bottle lacks a belief in God. But
the water bottle doesn't have the capacity to believe.
Right, I know.
You addressed this with Cosmic Skeptic, like in 2017. When
Yeah.
And
okay, but the audience doesn't know this, so just give me a chance to answer.
You guys should check that out.
Okay.
It's pretty good.
If we define atheism as a lack of belief in God or whatever,
sure,
then we're not really saying anything, because everything that doesn't have the capacity to believe anything could be called an atheist then.
And a water bottle could also be called a vegan if you say it's something that doesn't eat animal parts. As far as that label is being applied, it's ineffective in that case. I would say atheism is related only to those things that have the capacity to believe in the first place.
We can argue over definitions all day long. When I'm debating an atheist, whether it's Christopher Hitchens, Michael Shermer, Jeffrey Lauder, whoever it is,
Sure.
When we set up a debate, I say, let's debate this. What better explains reality, theism or atheism? Or if you want to call atheism materialism, whatever you want to call it.
But the point is, theism is not trying to explain reality.
Yes, we are.
No, that's not what it is doing. And I'm telling you, as an atheist, that's not what I'm doing. What I'm doing is, you are coming to me and you're saying, hey, God explains X, Y, and Z. And I'm saying, well, how do you know that? And why do you know that? And convince me of that.
Okay. Let me finish my point, Scott. Okay?
Sure.
When two people come to debate on this issue, I'm going to say, when I look at reality around me, when I look at the creation of the universe or the fact that the universe exists, the fine-tuning, the objective moral values, when I look at what appears to be design in life and where life came from, when I look at consciousness and free will and the laws of logic and our ability to reason, I think anybody coming onto a debate stage has to give causes for why those things exist.
No, they only have to show that your arguments aren't correct or fallacious.
No. When you frame the debate the way we frame it, what better explains reality? And reality includes all those things I just mentioned. Then I have the burden of proof to say, I think these things are best explained by theism. And the atheist has the burden of proof to say, okay, I see those things exist. Here's my explanation for why they exist.
Well, then I don't believe any atheist that I've ever seen debate with you has ever accepted a debate under that kind of framework. The framework is never that
Scott,
atheism is a better explanation. It's that your theism is not a sufficient explanation.
Well, you'll have to talk to them, Scott, because they agreed every time. Christopher Hitchens.
You guys should check out the videos on YouTube.
Yes,
that's not
Michael
what happened.
Shermer.
No,
Okay, just so you know. What did you say, Scott? I was lying?
Yes. He said you were lying.
I'll be happy to, if you give me your email address, I will send you a video of all those debates, and you can watch.
I've seen plenty of them. I watched them while I was waiting to see this talk.
Okay, well, those were the titles of the debates. And the reason we do that, ladies and gentlemen, is because let me put it this way, it's easy to smell a rotten egg, it's hard to lay a better one. Okay? So if someone has a position over there that I think is wrong, I can throw eggs at it and I can try and diffuse and say that's a bad argument, that's a bad argument. But I then still have the burden of proof to say, well, what is my explanation for the way things are the way they are? Let me give you one last illustration, because this is an important point that Scott brought up. If I'm a detective and atheist Michael Shermer is a detective, and we come on a dead body, and I say, okay, I'm looking at all the evidence here, I think candidate X did it. And Michael Shermer says, no, candidate X did it, or didn't do it. That's the wrong, he's not the murderer. And I say, okay, who is the murderer then? And he says, well, I just lack a belief that your guy's the murderer. Is he a good detective? No. Shooting down my suspect isn't enough. If he's a good detective, he has to give reasons as to why candidate Y is the murderer, not just to say that your guy is the wrong guy. That's all I'm saying, Scott.
All right. So, again, I think, Frank did a great job there. So, in summary of a finite universe, the universe had a beginning, so it needed a beginner, right? He must have the following characteristics. We've kind of talked about this to summarize: self-existing, not contingent upon the universe, doesn't need the universe in order to exist himself, spaceless, outside of existing space, timeless, outside of time, immaterial, not part of the material universe that he made, powerful, has the capacity to make and maintain it, personal, had to have the will to do it, right, intentionally, didn't just make it by accident, intelligent, right, evidence for design, which is purposeful, Moral laws exist as evidence of a mind and values, right? Only God is the first uncaused cause of the universe. Only God is eternal and separate from his creation. And the red lines, these will be covered in subsequent presentations.
We live in an amazing universe. Have you ever wondered why it exists? Why does anything at all exist? Gottfried Leibniz wrote, "The first question which should rightly be asked is, why is there something rather than nothing?" He came to the conclusion that the explanation is found in God. But is this reasonable? Everything that exists has an explanation of its existence. If the universe has an explanation of its existence, that explanation is God. The universe exists. From these, it follows logically that the explanation of the universe's existence is God. The logic of this argument is airtight. If the three premises are true, the conclusion is unavoidable. But are they more plausibly true than false? The third premise is undeniable for anyone seeking truth. But what about the first premise? Why not say, the universe is just there, and that's all? No explanation needed. End of discussion. Well, imagine you and a friend are hiking in the woods and come across a shiny sphere lying on the ground. You would, naturally, wonder how it came to be there. And you'd think it odd if your friend said, "There's no reason or explanation for it. Stop wondering. It just is." And if the ball were larger, it would still require an explanation. In fact, if the ball were the size of the universe, the change in its size wouldn't remove the need for an explanation. Indeed, curiosity about the existence of the universe seems scientific and intuitive. Someone might say, if everything that exists needs an explanation, what about God? Doesn't he need an explanation? And if God doesn't need an explanation, then why does the universe need an explanation? To address this, Leibniz makes a key distinction between things that exist necessarily and things that exist contingently. Things that exist necessarily exist by necessity of their own nature. It's impossible for them not to exist. Many mathematicians think that abstract objects like numbers and sets exist like this. They're not caused to exist by something else, they just exist by necessity of their own nature. Things that exist contingently are caused to exist by something else. Most of the things we're familiar with exist contingently. They don't have to exist. They only exist because something else caused them to exist. If your parents had never met, you wouldn't exist. There's no reason to think the world around us had to exist. If the universe had developed differently, there might have been no stars or planets. It's logically possible that the whole universe might not have existed. It doesn't exist necessarily, it exists contingently. If the universe might not have existed, why does it exist? The only adequate explanation for the existence of a contingent universe is that its existence rests on a non-contingent being, something that cannot not exist because of the necessity of its own nature. It would exist no matter what. So, everything that exists has an explanation of its existence, either in the necessity of its own nature or in an external cause. But what about our second premise? Is it reasonable to call the explanation of the universe God? Well, what is the universe? It's all of space-time reality, including all matter and energy. It follows that if the universe has a cause of its existence, that cause cannot be part of the universe. It must be non-physical and immaterial, beyond space and time. The list of entities that could possibly fit this description is fairly short, and abstract objects cannot cause anything. Leibniz's contingency argument shows that the explanation for the existence of the universe can be found only in the existence of God. Or, if you prefer not to use the term God, you may simply call him the extremely powerful, uncaused, necessarily existing, non-contingent, non-physical, immaterial, eternal being who created the entire universe and everything in it.
Again, those little videos are very helpful. Now, if we jump back to the Bible for a minute, Paul's argument in Romans 1 talks all about this. He says those who suppress the truth in unrighteousness, right? He tells us in Romans 1, 19 and 20, what may be known of God is manifest in them, because God has created everybody with this in them. Now, this argument applies to the cosmological argument, the design argument, because of what we can see, what we can observe, seeing the results of creation and then arguing from effect back to cause, which gets to God, right? So man was created with the ability to reason from what is available that all can observe. Everybody can see the same thing. For God has shown it to them, for since the creation of the world, his invisible attributes are clearly seen, right? So God is known, not known directly, but by his effects. He gives the indication of his existence, right? And requires faith, which Paul talks about a few verses earlier in the gospel. So in the second half of 20, he says that these things are being understood by the things that are made, even his eternal power. Now, God is powerful enough, which is the cosmological argument, to make and sustain the universe. And Godhead. Well, what does that mean? Intelligence reveals his design. The Godhead is more than just power. It's intelligence. It's it's personage, right, in the Godhead. And so there's intelligence for design, and that tells us that everybody is without an excuse. So man has to deny his senses, reason, and logic to deny God's existence. And then we get into the moral argument. We'll talk about Romans 2 and how conscience is affected there. And God has given everybody a conscience. But right now, this is just kind of how the cosmological argument and the design argument actually tie into Romans 1. So we'll end with two quick videos. The first video is Dr. John Lennox, and he's going to talk about how the Creator is not created. And in the second video, Dr. Lennox will explain the conflict between materialism and theism, and that will pretty much end. So, I mean, look, if you're running out of time now, that's fine. Otherwise, you can hang in for the two videos. I think you'll.
If you ask the question, who created the Creator, you presuppose the Creator is created by definition. Philosophers have a name for that. They call it the complex question, in that it constrains the possible range of solutions without you realizing it. Who created the X presupposes that X is created. So it has no relevance to an X that is not created. Of course not. So you see, the question is, in Dawkins' words, a non-question. Because the Christian claim is, of course, that God is eternal. He never came to exist. He caused all that exists to exist, but he himself never came to exist. And if there is a God like that, he falls from Dawkins' question. Indeed, I put it to him that if he had written a book called The Created God's Delusion, nobody would have bought it. Because we've known for centuries that created gods are a delusion. We often call them idols. But the question has a little twist, ladies and gentlemen. As I put it to Richard in one of our debates, you believe it's a valid question. And indeed, in your universe, it probably is, because you believe that the universe created you. Now let me ask you your own question. Who created your Creator? I'm still waiting for the answer. The new atheists are determined to spread the myth that science and belief in God are incompatible. I say myth because it's very easy to see that that is far too simplistic an analysis. How can science and belief in God be essentially incompatible when, for instance, so many leading scientists at my own University of Oxford believe in God? I can name the heads of several scientific departments, world famous in their fields, nanotechnology, electrical engineering, and so on, who are believers in God. And in this country, just to name one, William Phillips, Nobel Prize winner for physics, is a believer in God. And what I simply observe is this, that brilliant science can be done by atheists, and brilliant science can be done by believers in God, which shows us, ladies and gentlemen, that the conflict which is real lies much deeper in. It is not simplistically between science and belief in God and the supernatural. It is between two worldviews, two concepts of the nature of ultimate reality. And it is against that background that I wish to make my remarks. The one worldview is naturalism or materialism, there's very little difference between them, which believes that this universe is all that exists, or the multiverse. And that has implications for the nature of explanation. It means that explanation, by definition, must be reductionist from the bottom up, because there is no transcendence, there is no ultimate top-down causation. That was the view of Democritus and Leucippus in the ancient world. But also in that Greek melting pot, there were philosophers like Socrates and Plato and Aristotle, and they did not accept that view. They believed there was transcendence, there was something more. And those two views come barreling up through history, and they divide us in this room tonight. And they divide the professors in the academy, both in Oxford and in Cambridge, in England and in Massachusetts. So what we're talking about, ladies and gentlemen, is worldviews, belief systems, each of them. The one is naturalism and the other is theism. And it's just here that we encounter the first confusion. When I debated Princeton professor Peter Singer in Australia recently, he started by saying to us that his chief objection to religious belief was that people remained in the faith in which they'd been brought up. And of course, I was a prime example. So just to redress the balance, I asked him publicly about his parents. I said, Peter, were your parents atheists? And he said, yes, they were. So I said, you remained in the faith in which you were brought up then. Oh, but he said, it isn't a faith. Oh, I said, I was under the impression you believed it. Now, ladies and gentlemen, that little spat, and I got on very well with Peter Singer, you can watch the debate online, is very revealing, because it's consistent with the attitude of the new atheists to regard religious faith as faith, and therefore, by definition, believing where there is no evidence. But atheism isn't a faith. And of course, any philosopher could point out to them how trivial that is. It is very important to see that we are dealing with two belief systems. One believes that this universe is the ultimate reality, mass energy. The other believes that God is the ultimate reality. And the burning question is, what evidence is there for the veritas of either of them, the truth of either of them? And in particular, what way does science point? And therefore, we need to be clear that the kind of faith that the new atheists are describing is what most of us would call blind faith. It's dangerous, of course. But faith, in its ordinary dictionary sense, derives from the word fides. It means trust. And all of us know that we don't usually trust people unless we're gullible, unless there's evidence to do so. We don't trust the banks either unless there's evidence to do so, but that's another story. But the banking crisis has at least taught all of us the difference between evidence-based faith and non-evidence-based faith. And now I cannot, of course, speak for other religions. They must rightly speak for themselves. But I'd like to make it very clear that Christianity is an evidence-based faith. One of the central statements of the Gospel of John is, "These things are written," he said, "that you might believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, and that believing you might have life in his name." In other words, here's the evidence. I've selected it in order for it to provide a basis for your trust, for your confidence, for your faith.
For more information about the Veritas Forum, including additional recordings and a calendar of upcoming events, please visit our website at veritas.org.
So that's, I mean, what can you say about John Lennox? I mean, you know, he's just really, really good at bringing out those points. But the point that he brought out at the end is so critical because, you know, I've had these debates, in a sense, not official ones, with atheists where they're always trying to say they don't actually have a belief. And that's pretty much just an avoidance of the issue. You know, atheism is not the standard position. They still have a structure. They still have a group of people that have a similar perspective and believe that certain things connect to reality and other things don't. That is a belief system, quite simply. But we've come to the end now. I wanted to show you these. This is, again, a reminder for recommended reading, Stealing from God by Turek. And this one by John Lennox is really good. Can Science Explain Everything? He wrote there was a more detailed one, I believe, in the past, and then he kind of pared it down for those of us that are not credentialed scientists. So kind of put the cookies on the shelf for us. I think it is definitely worth it. So anyways, we'll jump on to point 4 next time, talking about miracles. So until then, may God richly bless you as you continue to study his word.